There we are, zooming in, awaiting poll closings at 9 p.m. and possible race calls. Actually, race calls coming. And there goes our chandelier.
The chandelier. Goes up and down. It's a lot of things happening in this studio.
I mean, one of the big questions that's materializing here tonight is whether or not, there might be a pretty big red brick wall happening in a number of places in terms of what we've seen in Virginia. Riggleman, Barr, some of these races that looked like they were going the other way. Whether the blue wave will materialize as we continue to move through the night, I mean, that is the question. But some of the early things that we went in here with in terms of anticipation and early luck are materializing in quite an
Andy Barr,
way.
Kentucky 6, pulling out a big win there. And now we're looking really heavily at Florida, Indiana. It has moved towards the Republicans in both the governor's race and the Senate races there. And we're starting to get raw vote totals in Missouri and other places. And we have this countdown that is happening.
And you have to keep talking until you get to 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock. And now,
there we go.
It is 9 o'clock on the East Coast, and polls have just closed in 14 more states, including Arizona, Texas, and North Dakota. Each of those will have a major impact on whether Republicans retain control of the U.S. Senate.
It will not come as a surprise to you that Arizona is too early to say whether Republican Congresswoman Martha McSally will beat Democratic Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema to succeed retiring GOP Senator Jeff Flake.
Also too early to project a winner in Texas. This race obviously getting a lot of attention. Democratic Congressman Beto O'Rourke trying to unseat incumbent Republican Senator Ted Cruz in what has become the most expensive Senate race in U.S. history. At the moment, Cruz has a very slight lead.
O'Rourke has a very slight lead, it looks like.
Oh, I think this is using voter analysis and raw vote total.
Putting it all together. It's pretty close, anyway, in Texas at this point. And in North Dakota, we are waiting for more data to project where we are in this race with the incumbent Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp and her Republican challenger, Congressman Kevin Cramer. As of the poll closing, Cramer is in the lead right now. A pretty sizable lead, but we've only got 4% of the vote in right there.
The other hotly contested race we're watching at this hour in Wisconsin, incumbent Republican Governor Scott Walker currently trailing Democrat Tony Evers, the state's education superintendent. Too early to make a call there.
Let's go to New York for a moment. Governor Andrew Cuomo, who defeated Sex and the City actress Cynthia Nixon 7 weeks ago in the Democratic primary, today wins a third term by beating handily Republican Mark Molinaro.
Also in New York, Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand will win re-election to a second full term by defeating Republican Shelley Farley. She's being talked about as a possible presidential candidate, by the way.
And in one of the two Senate races in Minnesota today, Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar will win a third term by beating GOP state lawmaker Jim Newberger. She's also discussed as a possible 2020 Democrat candidate.
In the other Minnesota Senate race, Democratic Senator Tina Smith will win election to fill the remainder of Senator Al Franken's term until January 2021. She defeated the state senator Karen Housley.
And let's look at Wisconsin, where Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin will win a second term. She has defeated GOP State Senator Leah Vukmir.
Keep in mind that as of 9 p.m. Eastern Time, polls have closed in fully 80% of congressional districts across the country, including most of the tightest toss-up races that will determine control of the U.S. House of Representatives. So if Democrats, remember, pick up a net gain of 23 seats, they will take control of the chamber for the first time since 2011. We are not yet at the place where we can call or make a projection. There's a lot of white on that board, as you see.
This is developing into a very interesting evening. So let's go over to the panel and get your thoughts on what we're seeing so far. Guy Benson joining us. Guy, what do you think?
Well, looking big picture, it's looking like a pretty good night for the Democrats, but not quite the great night that some of them had been hoping for. Kentucky 6 being one of those bellwether House races for the Republican to hang on there in Trump country in Kentucky is a big one. Also, it's not quite over yet in some of these other races, but I know Virginia 5 has been called. That was on the outer limits of a big wave. The Democrats are saying, all right, if we're going to really have a 2010-style wave, we're going to pick up Virginia 5. They've lost that one. And then in Indiana, I know it's still too close for us to call, but that's looking pretty darn good for the Republican Mike Braun. To put a pickup on the board on the Senate side that early would be enormous for the GOP's hopes to hang on to that upper chamber, which has been so crucial to confirming so many judges, including 2 Supreme Court justices during the Trump administration. The Senate is a very important priority for many conservatives.
Speaking of the Senate, we have a major race call to make right now. First in New Jersey, the Fox News decision desk can now project Democratic Senator Robert Menendez will win re-election by defeating Republican businessman Bob Hugin, although some Republicans had viewed Menendez as very vulnerable due to that federal corruption trial 2017. The 12-year Senate veteran really never trailed Hugin, even though it was called a toss-up by Cook Political Report. He is going to go on and win.
And we have another major race call to make tonight in the Tennessee Senate race. The Fox News decision desk can now project that Republican Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn will defeat former Democratic Governor Phil Bredesen to replace retiring GOP Senator Bob Corker. Although Blackburn spent all summer trailing Bredesen in the polls, she closed the gap. She was a tireless campaigner in this race and took the lead about a month ago. Britt, your thoughts?
Well, that was a race that ended up having a lot to do with Kavanaugh, because Bredesen did come out finally and say that he would have voted for Kavanaugh, and he's been critical of his party ever since. But that was a big deal in the state of Tennessee, and Blackburn made the most of it. And I think that this is one race where the Kavanaugh vote made a real difference.
Yeah, Dana, I think that this race was really interesting. Democrats had a lot of hopes for Phil Bredesen.
Well, the thing is, I was just thinking about this. We just called Menendez in New Jersey. The New Jersey Star-Ledger, when it endorsed Menendez, the headline was, "Choke it down, vote for Menendez." I mean, that's how distasteful it was for them, and yet he wins it. And you think about a state like Florida that we talk a lot about. It's a swing state. We're always going to talk a lot about it. But states like New Jersey, Kentucky, Tennessee, and probably Texas, they tend to be in their natural state. And so this wouldn't be a terrible surprise in New Jersey. And Marsha Blackburn, I believe that, well, I think she was the first woman congresswoman from Tennessee, and now going to the Senate, and she's winning it by that much. I think if Democrats can't figure out a way to win in some of these Midwestern states, southeastern states, they're going to have a lot of soul searching to do, because their expectations were so sky high that they were never going to be able to meet those expectations.
It's interesting, too. Phil Bredesen said in a recent interview that the national Democratic brand failed him, essentially, that he couldn't fit the mold of it. And he, really spent a lot of time trying to sound as Trump-like as he possibly could. Also, just as a side note, they thought it was a big deal when Taylor Swift came out and supported Phil Bredesen. That turned out to not be a positive, ultimately, for Bredesen. So a tough night for Taylor Swift.
Yes. Marie, this is not lining up, I think, exactly like our voter analysis early look.
Yeah.
It is actually skewing more Republican than the original view of some of those numbers.
Well, and I think it will be interesting to see why that is. Did more Democrats, were they fired up and they voted early? Are more Republicans breaking at the end of the day and staying home? And staying home, I mean, by that, voting for Republicans, right? Because I think there was a lot of hope on the Democratic side that especially Republican women, they may not come out and vote for a Democrat, but maybe they just will sit this one out. I think it looks like many of them may have stayed home with their party. But what's interesting, I think, also in some of the early races we're getting called, Donna Shalala winning in Florida. That's a surprise to a lot of us. I did not expect that to go that early. So one thing I think Democrats are looking at across the country is we thought that the Andy Barr race might be a good one to watch for a bellwether, and that's now been called for Republicans. But if we're picking up seats places we didn't think were bellwethers, like this Florida race with Donna Shalala, there are I mentioned this earlier, there are a number of places like Kansas, like Texas, and congressional districts that Democrats are fielding folks that are actually making things competitive. The other thing that's interesting is Ohio, which Donald Trump won by 8 points, almost as much as he won Texas by. Sherrod Brown basically didn't have a contest tonight.
Sure.
Already been called for him in the Senate.
Well, that was long predicted going in.
It was, but the fact that the Trump coalition there couldn't show up to vote for a Republican Senate candidate, I think is interesting and may impact the governor's race.
Laura, let's go back to Florida. I think that these races are going to be really definitive tonight.
Yeah. I mean, it's the current total, and it keeps kind of switching, is about 60 to 70 to 80,000 votes between the candidates. Again, we don't know who's going to ultimately pull this off. But this was a state where, let's say, Rick Scott was a very popular governor, and the state is extremely well run. It was razor-thin margin for Donald Trump. Remember, I think he wanted about, what, 100,000 or so votes?
I'm just going to interrupt you. We're
Yes.
going to call Joe Manchin winning West Virginia Senate over Patrick Morrissey. There was some thought that Patrick Morrissey could close the gap here, but Joe Manchin, longtime incumbent West Virginia senator, voted for Kavanaugh, is going to return to the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, the Kavanaugh vote, I think, without a doubt, helped him there. But in Florida, again, the president has made so many trips there. I think, obviously, the Southern White House and Mar-a-Lago, but campaign trips there. I think that was critical. But do not discount the power of Rick Scott, who his response to hurricanes, his response to just the general governance of that state, that in and of itself was competence. Competence was on the ballot versus maybe for Nelson, someone who had longevity and seniority. Nelson's not someone who keeps connected to the voters. Gillum is a charismatic guy, but he's far left for the state of Florida. Tallahassee is not the rest of Florida. If Ron DeSantis pulls out a victory, I keep saying this is all Donald Trump's victory tonight.
There are some people who have called the race for DeSantis. We haven't yet, and our not doing so is prudent as always. We've had a very good track record, but it's worth noting that some election experts have called the race for DeSantis to win.
One of the other interesting things when we look at some of the victors tonight in the Senate races on the Democratic side, you can begin to see this Democratic field for president shaping up. Elizabeth Warren won re-election. Bernie Sanders won re-election. Kirsten Gillibrand won re-election. So did Amy Klobuchar. Those are four people that are being mentioned potentially as Democratic presidential candidates. And they all won tonight.
And Chris, if Beto O'Rourke wins in Texas, he's the instant front runner, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Some people would say even if he loses, he can go and start running for president.
Not all for naught.
Take his $70 million right to Des Moines. 3% in Texas. There you see the early vote. In Texas, you want to see the raw vote total. We have it that using the voter analysis plus the raw total, Ted Cruz with a slight lead, even though that's not what it shows on the screen. But it's tighter than a lot of people thought it was going to be in Texas.
Can I just go back to one thing Dana said? I think sometimes parties fall in love with the idea that they're going to be able to flip a state that they haven't won in for a long time. I think Republicans were chasing this dream in New Jersey with Bob Hugin against Bob Menendez, who obviously had huge ethical problems. And so there was a reason to believe it. But it's a really blue state. And the idea that you were going to get a Republican senator in a state like that was about as unlikely as that you were going to get a Democratic senator in a state like Tennessee. Donald Trump won Tennessee in 2016 by 26 points. So this would, in fact, Phil Bredesen was probably the only Democrat who's had a chance of winning in Tennessee. And as it turns out, you look at the vote there, not much of a chance.
Yeah, that's right. We'll be calling all kinds of races. Associated Press moving Larry Hogan winning a landslide in Maryland. Interesting dynamic there where Republican governors winning in blue states. We're probably going to see others of those tonight.
Charlie Baker, too.
Charlie Baker in Massachusetts. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side, we'll look at Texas. We're going to update you on Indiana because that is an interesting race that we could be getting ready to call in the Senate. Keep it here. America's Election Headquarters continues.
Democratic urban strongholds are coming in with a smaller total than you might think, given what's happening in the rest of the state. And my suspicion is we're going to see African-American vote not excited about turning out to vote. The other thing is he is an interesting candidate. I was talking to a Republican bigwig the other day who actually had gone in to help campaign for him and said, he doesn't have much charisma. And I said, well, what do you expect? I said, Mitch Daniels, Mr. Charisma,
I like Mitch Daniels.
Well, so do I a lot. But this is a state where Mike Braun fits it. Here's a guy who grew up in Jasper, Indiana, goes to Harvard Business School, gets recruited by some of the biggest companies in America, and decides to go home to Jasper, where he's the vice president of a furniture company, and then decides, I'm going to go start my own business. And so, he comes across as solid, steady, and not very charismatic, but that may be good for Indiana.
Like Tennessee, the Kavanaugh vote moved this race. it definitely affected this race. It shifted it at that time. We should point out on the board that Republicans' net gain is now +1 in the Senate. So Democrats now have to get 3 pickups to take control of the Senate. It gets a lot tougher with Joe Donnelly going down.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned Kavanaugh, and that's right. But and I was looking at surveys in this state in August and September, and Republicans in late August and early September in the private surveys for the Senate Leadership Fund were starting to come home and starting to get excited about coming out. So by the time we got to the 3rd and 4th weeks of September, Kavanaugh was an accelerant. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire that was already burning pretty well, and that has not gone away. The issue of the importance of Kavanaugh has sort of receded in people's minds, but the enthusiasm that it kindled is still there right here at the end.
Yeah, and that was one of the issues that we saw in the voter analysis. It looked like Kavanaugh could even cut the other way. That perhaps it had energized Democrats more than Republicans. It was very close in terms of this voter analysis. And yet, as we have said, you go through, Phil Bredesen was pressed and pressed. What would you have done if you were in the Senate? Finally, he said, I would have voted for Kavanaugh. And you look at Joe Donnelly, who said no. And that was big news when he made that decision. And Joe Manchin, the only Democrat to vote for Kavanaugh, it had a number of positive factors working for him in West Virginia, but that was clearly one of them.
I don't have a little bit of time here before we take a break. Just bounce to Florida. What you're seeing in your magical computer there?
Well, there's still a lot of vote out still in the panhandle for the Republicans, but this one has still got a lot of room to grow.
On the governor's and Senate.
Governors and the Senate side, because we have a lot of precincts out in Miami, Broward, and Palm Beach. I will say this: one interesting thing to me is that DeSantis has got more votes than Scott does. And but not by a lot, but by, excuse me, I'm sorry. Scott has 12,000 more votes than DeSantis has, but Gillum is running 40-some-odd thousand votes behind Nelson. So part of this story is not just the Trump endorsement helped, but also Gillum may be just a little bit too radical for some Floridians. There are 40,000 votes going to the reform candidate, and he's running 40,000 votes behind Nelson. I don't think these things are coincidental.
But the vote out, you're saying there's some parts of Broward, some parts of Miami?
Yeah, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach all have about 300-plus precincts left out. There are a bunch of precincts left out in the Panhandle. The question is going to be a race to how much of the Panhandle offsets the Southeast Florida, and then how many in Southeast Florida can close the now existing gap between the Republicans and Democrats.
Well, here's a positive. The lawyers don't have to fly in. They can they're ready there and ready for the recount.
Any recount in Florida not only employs every single Florida election law expert, it has everybody across America fully employed for whatever number of days are necessary to conduct the recount.
Like 36.
The memories.
Yeah, well, that's 36 days. Not that we remember that bitterly. And
the memories.
Bring back the old memories.
Yes. All right, panel, stand by if you would.
Quick break. We'll be right back after this.
An election alert now, an update on some of the tight races. Here is the governor's race in Florida we've been talking about. 72,000 plus separate Ron DeSantis from Andrew Gillum. As you see, 93%. It's still, that's the vote, the percentage of vote in. Too close to call for us. Then you look at the Senate race, also too close to call. 68,000 separating Rick Scott and Bill Nelson, the incumbent Democrat. Also, let's take a look at Kyrsten Sinema. This is too early. Based on our voter analysis, we don't even have the raw vote total in there. We do have some calls to make, though. Obviously, we just called Indiana Senate for Mike Braun, and we have some governor's races to call as well. In Vermont, Phil Scott will win for the Republican, will defeat the Democrat in Vermont, traditionally skewing Democrat in that state. Also, the Republican winning in Oklahoma with a big win for Kevin Stitt, following up on Mary Fallon, the incumbent Republican. And Rhode Island, the Democrat Gina Raimondo will win in Rhode Island's governor's race.
Let's bring in our next guest from the White House. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders joins us now. Sarah, good evening to you. Big election night. We're waiting for a lot of these results to come in, but how are folks at the White House feeling about this so far?
So far, we feel good about where we are. Frankly, right now, the president's had an incredible night, particularly when you look at Mike Braun. This was a candidate that a lot of people had projected to lose, and not just lose by a little, but lose by a lot. This is somebody the president just went in and closed the deal for last night. This was also somebody who had an incredibly tough primary, and immediately following the primary, the president came in, unified the party, brought them together, and you're seeing the results of that hard work pay off tonight. So far, we feel good about where we are, but still a long night to go.
What do you think about the House? Like, what is the thinking at the White House, and what numbers you're looking at? Right now, Democrats need 23. They've picked up 2, and we haven't made a lot of calls along those lines.
Certainly the House is still early. One race to look at is Andy Barr of Kentucky. This was a race that a lot of people were saying was one to watch that could be one of the first indicators of what the night could look like. That's been called. This is another race where the president went in. Frankly, the candidates who have embraced the president and the president has gone in to campaign for over the last several weeks are candidates that we're seeing doing very well tonight in those places, and certainly feel good about where things are headed. But again, very early in this process, but we feel very comfortable about where we are. Even James Carville, I think, said it best. Anybody that expected a blue wave tonight, probably not going to get that. And I think that is 100% due to the president's leadership and the success that he's had in the first 2 years since taking office. He's had unprecedented success, and you're seeing a lot of that pay off, and you're seeing Americans come out and unanimously say that they are proud of this president and proud of what he's done in these 2 years.
Sarah, thoughts on Florida? Obviously, the president put his weight behind Ron DeSantis, really helped him to win the primary there in a big way. Tight race there for the governor's race and also for the Senate right now.
Again, that's an extremely close race. This is a place where people said that there was no way Republicans could take either of those seats. And certainly if they do, I think that a lot of the credit will go to the president who's been in to campaign for them. But still very close and a little bit of time left to see what happens there.
Sarah, last thing. We had former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Randell on earlier, Democrat from Pennsylvania. He said if Democrats pick up the House, and that's still an if as of tonight, right now, that they should legislate, and not investigate. Do you think that would happen if Democrats take over the House?
I think that's what should happen. I think that's what America wants to see. Look, we have a president that's willing to work across the aisle to get things done. We feel good about where we are in the Senate, but if Democrats take the House, they shouldn't waste time investigating. They should focus on what the people have put them there to do. There are a lot of things that the president would love to work with them on, and hopefully they'll come to the table and be willing to do that and not continue to be the party of resist and obstruct, but want to actually work with this president to solve some of the big problems that we've been leading on over the last 2 years.
Sarah, there's been a lot of discussion about that the president didn't campaign hard enough on the issue of the economy. Even he said at one point at one of the rallies, you know, sometimes the economy is not the most interesting thing to talk about. He really went in very intensely on the issue of the caravan and immigration. Is he feeling good about that decision right now?
Look, the president talked about the economy constantly. The problem was the media didn't want to cover the economy. It's the first time you'd ever have a booming economy, and they say you guys didn't talk about it enough. We talked about the economy every single day. We're going to continue to, because it's going to continue to do well under this president because of the tax cuts, because of deregulation. We've seen an economic boom like we haven't seen in decades, and I think you're seeing that reflected certainly in the Senate votes tonight, as well as the president's fight to get Justice Kavanaugh on the bench. I think those are two big factors in the president's leadership that you're seeing play out on the election field
Sarah
tonight.
Sanders, live on the North Lawn of the White House. Sarah, thank you. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Sarah.
We have a major race projection to make right now in that so-called jungle primary in Mississippi's special Senate election. Fox News Decision Desk can now project that none of the 4 candidates will win tonight because none will get 50% of the vote. So what does that mean? The top 2 finishers, you're looking at it right there, Republican incumbent Cindy Hyde-Smith and Democratic challenger Mike Espy, will face each other in a runoff election November 27th. It's early here, 10% in. You've got 43% to 39%. Bottom line is neither one will get to 50%. There is a scenario. It might not happen now with Joe Donnelly going down in Indiana, but the scenario would be for Democrats to take control, that they would win enough to have a 50-50 tie, and then with Mississippi hanging out there, it would be decided November 27th. Imagine that. One race, media, everyone, money.
After Thanksgiving.
After Thanksgiving. So it's possible, but we'll see. The balance of power now, Republicans are up one in the U.S. Senate.
We're going to take a quick break?
Yes.
Oh. All right. We're going to keep going. Do we have another race to call?
No. Let's bring in the panel.
Let's bring in the panel.
Carl, all right, talk to me about Texas.
Well, we got the early vote in, and we're missing Harris County, at least in the numbers I'm looking at. So early vote has been good for the Democrats in recent years, and there's a gap between the top of the ticket and the next person on it. Ted Cruz is losing, and Greg Abbott is winning. My suspicion is that we're going to see a little bit more blue when Harris County comes in, but we have about 100 counties out in rural Texas, including places like Midland and Odessa and Abilene and Amarillo that are not in, and this is going to be a red state by the end of that process.
So right now, you say Cruz pulls this out, looking at the numbers you're looking at?
Yeah. But it's going to be a big gap. I mean, when you got the governor winning, the early vote is Democrat, and the Republican governor's winning by 10 points, and Ted Cruz is slightly behind.
We talked last night, Carl. You felt, very good about this race. You said Texas will act like Texas in the end, and that he was way too progressive for Texas. So how do you explain how close this is?
Well, he's got a good absentee vote. If you take a look at it, for example, in the part of the state where I live, Travis County, it's always been the little blueberry in the middle of a big red sea. Well, there are two counties right next to it, Hayes and Williamson, that have been Republican, and in the early vote, they're Democrat. Now, part of that is that the Beto campaign, Robert Francis O'Rourke, did a good job of going to Texas State University.
You call him by the name that he likes to go by.
Well, I call him by the name that he appears on the ballot by. So, but they went to the Texas State University in San Marcos in Hayes County and insisted that they open up a special voting location, and literally 1,000 students a day were going through that special voting location last week, and I'm sure they broke 60, 40, 70, 30 for Robert Francis O'Rourke.
Okay, we got to run here, Britt. I'll come back to this. We are now ready to make one of the biggest calls of the night. The Fox News Decision Desk can now project that Democrats will take control of the House of Representatives for the first time in 8 years, dealing a major setback to President Trump's legislative agenda, giving fresh hope to liberals who want to investigate, as we just talked about, possibly even impeach the president. Democrats now will control the Senate.
Although the exact size of
the House, I'm sorry, the House.
Exact size of this, there's a look at the balance of power right now. The majority size is not clear yet. It could be a very slim margin. Democrats will soon have to decide whether they will restore Nancy Pelosi to her old job as Speaker of the House. I think there were 30-some candidates who ran on saying that they would not try to put Nancy Pelosi back in the Speaker's position. She's made it very clear that she thought that they would win and that she would indeed take that Speaker role again.
Democrats control the House. The reason we can make that call is the voter analysis data plus the raw total, looking at the numbers, the decision desk making that call. Chris, your thoughts on that and what it means in the big picture?
It is a very, very big deal. I think of Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House, Adam Schiff as the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Elijah Cummings as the head of the House Oversight Committee, Jerry Nadler as the head of the Judiciary Committee, Maxine Waters, Financial Services. I know a lot of listeners out there, their heads are exploding, but this is going to be a very different Washington. And yes, I think that you'll see an effort to legislate, and maybe on things like infrastructure, there'll be a possibility of doing it. But one of the things that a lot of Democrats also believe that they have been sent to Washington to do in this new Congress will be to investigate. And you can be sure that they're going to haul members of the Trump administration up, and it'll make life very difficult for them. And there's been some criticism that the Trump White House is not prepared, as other White Houses have been when they lose control of one house, for the onslaught of investigations and subpoenas that they're about to face.
No, there were a lot of investigations by Republicans of the FBI and other subjects during these last couple of years. One difference we can certainly count on is that the investigations mounted by House Democrats into the Trump administration will receive far more favorable coverage than anything the Republicans have done in the last couple of years. It will likely be adoring coverage, and it will magnify the effect of it, because people are going to hear about it everywhere. And that's just a reality that the media we have today present.
Our bigger panel here, Steve, Molly, Katie, Carl. Molly, what are your thoughts on what this means?
Well, people should have had an expectation going into this, knowing that the average number of seats that Democrats were expected to get would be, just looking historically, was 28, which is more than was needed to take the House, that this was a natural result to expect. At the same time, I think it's actually challenging for Democrats because a lot of the seats that they're picking up are these candidates who were moderate, who were appealing to voters precisely because they're moderate, to come in and make it an investigation agenda as opposed to an agenda to help the American people, might put those very same seats that they just won to get the majority in jeopardy. So it's going to be, I think, a debate in the Democratic side whether to appeal to the base and have, the investigation palooza, or to have a more broad legislative agenda.
Jessica, your reaction to the fact that Democrats have now taken majority of the House?
I'm so relieved and glad that I was on set for this moment because I walked out here kind of panicked. I think it's great news. Obviously, when you saw the exit polls, it was very clear that health care was the #1 issue, and Democrats have been leading by 15+ points on the issue of health care for months now. To your point, Molly, I think it's a little early to decide which way we're going to go, investigate or legislate. I hope it's legislate. There is room with President Trump, who has liberal roots and loves to build things, to do some infrastructure together and to get on the same page about a lot of issues that a more conservative Republican president might not have done. The balance of power in the Senate will also be huge here in deciding how much we can do in terms of working together. But big sigh of relief here, and interested in how big the margin ends up.
Yeah, Steve?
I think that when you look at the serious implications of this, it is pretty much bad news all round, because what it means is that you're going to get a dent in that economic progress because people's confidence in the economy will suffer. I think business confidence will be undermined, and I think that could start to undermine the boom that we've seen. But
let me just interrupt you. Historically, the markets have liked a split government.
Gridlock.
The Clinton,
markets like gridlock.
The Clinton government, they kind of liked that government. But I know what you're saying as far as moving things forward with the Trump agenda.
I think what they'll be worried about is an expectation that you're going to see a return, if this is a sign of things to come, a return to the days of regulation and high taxes that get in the way of enterprise. And I think that will be the thing to look out for. But in terms of the politics, I think that, as Molly was saying, if we think about where we are right now, it feels to me as if actually the Democrats are underperforming the expectation. And in fact, if you look at what's going on as of now, could change, of course, it feels like the Trump effect, if you like, is positive, not negative. Where he really put the effort in, that's delivering the results for the Republicans. And on the other hand, what the Democrats and the resistance movement particularly were hoping for, this massive repudiation of Donald Trump and everything he stood for, that doesn't seem to be transpiring. And what we're getting is a pretty much of a tepid result. Of course, it gives them control, as we're projecting, and that will have real-world consequences. But politically, this doesn't feel like the kind of result that they were looking for at all.
Yeah.
Just to pick on what we're saying, it's worth remembering that even if he were to lose control of the Senate, his tax cut is protected because he can protect it with a veto. He can also protect all the things that went with it. So an awful lot of his program is in place and
key regulation.
He can continue to do what he's been doing. So the legislative effect of this, I think, will be gridlock. And as you pointed out, markets have liked gridlock in the past. There'll be no big regulatory legislative agenda, but the main pieces of his economic program are in place and almost certain to stay.
And Katie, quickly, he'll also now have a foil as he gets ready for 2020.
Right. He has someone to run against, and that will be House Democrats, especially if they go with the investigative route. When you have people like Maxine Waters, Elijah Cummings, and Adam Schiff in line for these chairmanships on the Oversight Committee, the House Intelligence Committee, et cetera, I think that the Republicans in the White House are in for some pretty serious rides. But moving forward on the Senate, so far, we have to look at the Marsha Blackburn race. She is far more on the Trump agenda than Bob Corker was. That's a win for President Trump and his agenda. And although the House is flipped, which causes legal problems for the White House, the Senate can do a lot on the president's agenda, especially when it comes to judges, even if the House has been flipped, or the House has been flipped.
You know, an interesting thing is going to be, what's the margin going to be for the Democrats? and who is making up those new members, there are 58 challengers, Democratic challengers, who are on the record saying they will not support Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. And there are 11 incumbent Democrats, all of whom are returning, who've said, I will not support Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. So if the number is 225 or 230, and we've got 11 Democrats already for certain returning, being joined by a group of new people saying not Nancy Pelosi, could be a problem getting 218 votes to make her Speaker of the House.
Panel, thank you. The other question is how many cabinet members decide to exodus before the investigations start. We will see. We have a lot of tight races. We're getting close to some calls, we think. We're going to bring that to you all after the break.
Take a look at Missouri right after the break. Results from Arizona, which is still too close to call at this point. Take a look at Texas as well, which is a very interesting race, 49.7 to 49.2. That's 7% in at this point, but that one may be a lot closer than it looked like it was going to be going in. Let's take a look at Florida as well. In the top left-hand corner there, you see Bill Nelson, longtime incumbent senator against Rick Scott, the former governor in Florida. That one is also a very tight race. Scott is slightly ahead at this point, 95% of that in. Still waiting for the Panhandle, still waiting for Palm Beach County, Broward County in the Florida races, which have become very interesting tonight. Missouri as well, just to round up there, 46.4% for Josh Hawley and 51.2% for Claire McCaskill. There's a lot still to come in the Missouri race.
And that's where Steve Ducey is right now, talking to voters. I think he's still in that pub. Are you still there?
How you doing there, Steve?
Springfield?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, you know, when you came to me 3 hours ago here at the Patton Alley Pub in Springfield, Missouri, there were only about 10 people here. But because we were on television, everybody from the county came because Fox News is making this election central for Springfield, Missouri. All right. Now I'm going to poll the audience right now regarding the Senate. Who wants to hear some news about the Senate? It is still too close to call. Sorry. All right. However, let me ask this. How many here tonight voted earlier today for Claire McCaskill? Make some noise. Okay, very good. And how many people voted for Josh Hawley? Number one issue for you voting. Who thought it was health care? Really? Nobody? Economy. One of Josh Hawley's number one issues was Judge Kavanaugh. All right. And what about the caravan? Anything there? Not so much on this. This guy right here, Alan, we were talking to him earlier. What was your number one issue this year?
Well, for us, it's the economy. We, Lucas and I, my son, we're partners in a small business. We're auctioneers and realtors. And the economy is going very well right now. I don't want to do anything to mess that up, and I felt like I had to vote Republican all the way.
But your son did not vote Republican.
No, typically I do vote Republican, but this time around I wasn't a big fan of either of the candidates. I voted third party. I felt like Claire had been there a little long, and I felt like that Josh was taking another step in the political ladder. So I voted third party this time.
All right. One other question as we walk over here. How many people thought that this election was a referendum about the President of the United States? Well, not so much. And listen, before we go, got to introduce this table of young people right here because they came in right after our live shot earlier. And Brett and Martha, the reason they came, they're all dressed up, is because they're going to the Josh Hawley victory party. Fingers crossed, they said earlier. But the reason they came back here was because there is a rumor on the internet that apparently Brett Baier is going to buy the entire bar drinks. So we're just going to have to find out about that.
I heard that too.
It's on. I'll give him my credit card.
Yeah, right?
All right, Steve, thank you very much. Have a great night. We want to go back just a second to Indiana, and this is a huge win for the Republicans against the incumbent Joe Donnelly, who just released a statement saying, a few minutes ago, I called Mike Braun, congratulated him on winning a hard-fought race. I'd like to thank every single American who believed in this campaign and worked to make it successful, and every Hoosier whom I have come across over the last 6 years who helped me to better serve my state. It's been one of the greatest honors of my life to represent Indiana in the Senate. I wish Mike the best. I hope he makes every single Hoosier proud as our senator. The incumbent Senator Joe Donnelly losing to Republican Mike Braun.
Yep. And we're watching Florida very closely. It looks like a lot of the vote is in Florida. Rick Scott is a little bit ahead right now. If he does end up winning, that would be another pickup. Too close to call at this point, as I said. The difference is 83,000 votes, according to the numbers that we have up there. But that's one that we're watching really closely as well.
Let's bring in our panel back. Carl, you're just writing stuff over there. What do you got?
Well, just looking at the gap in Texas between Greg Abbott and Ted Cruz, and back and forth, but just the maneuvering.
Okay, no whiteboard tonight.
I got a whiteboard, but their security took it away from me. They said that you considered it a threat, so I don't know. Maybe we can bring it on later with your personal permission.
Of course, of course. Britt, as you look at the night, this is going to come down to the drama of the Senate. And really, if that firewall, now that the House, we've called for the Democrats, whether the president has a firm control of his party in the Senate.
Yeah, and there are election experts out there that have called Florida Senate for Scott. I think it's probably early to do that, but that's happening. So what that tells us is it's looking pretty good for him. And if they win that, I think the Republicans are safely in control of the Senate. And it means that the president will have the opportunity going forward, as he's had for the past couple of years, to appoint more judges and get them confirmed. That's what Mitch McConnell has been focused on heavily. That is what he's been worried, that they would lose the House. But he has felt that the judges at all levels, and they could remake the judiciary over the next couple of years, continuing what they've been doing. And you know, when you think about it, we thought that the House would flip, right? We've thought that for a long time. And we've more recently come to believe the Senate would not, and it looks like there's no blue wave. It looks like a blue night because they win the House, but it doesn't appear so far that we have a blue wave.
Yeah, and that's really important if you look at the Senate and how important that control is.
Well, there's another race we haven't talked about at all tonight that I think most people expect that the Republicans are going to win, which is North Dakota.
Yeah.
And Kevin Cramer against Heidi Heitkamp. Heidi Heitkamp, the incumbent Democratic senator, and it looked in the most recent polls like Cramer had a distinct lead, and interestingly enough, President Trump didn't even feel the need in the last day or so to go out there because it looked like that was a safe seat for the Republicans. So it'll be interesting to see when if we call that, then there could be a net pickup of 3.
Didn't you think when she went ahead and voted no on Kavanaugh that she was looking past this election in that so very red state, that she was looking to her future in another office and another role?
You know, it's hard to put yourself in somebody else's mind. Maybe it's just her conviction, but it seemed if there was a political calculation, she wasn't making it. And in other words, she wasn't deciding I need to do this as Joe Manchin, for instance, did in West Virginia.
But it was a big factor in that race. It shifted things. 13% in. Cramer is up significantly right now. In our voter analysis data, we have a pretty big win for Cramer as it's shaping up. We're going to wait for more raw vote total before decision desk makes a call there. And I love the messages, Britt, to the decision desk, the subtle, somebody else has made the call. Can we get a shot of the decision desk?
I'm just reporting they get to decide.
That's exactly, here they are.
They are.
Let's look at them. What are they doing?
Can I say that's a fun group of people?
What are they
doing? I want to spend the evening with them.
All right, somebody's eating. There's a lot of huddling around.
Don't you think it looks
Look, there's
like
Chris.
an interrogation room
Bill
with an
Salmon,
aerial
our
camera
boss in
over it?
Washington.
Okay, Arn in Michigan in the back. He's pointing at some screens.
We're going
That's
to pay
important.
a price for this tomorrow, though, that we've mocked them this way.
No, I know.
Should we ask them if they should thumbs up whether or not we're ready to make a Florida call yet? No.
No.
Not going to happen.
Okay, they're not even looking at us. Carl.
You know, on North Dakota, this is an interesting story because We think of it today as a big red state, but 25 years ago, it was a Democrat state. 2 U.S. senators, both Democrats, 1 congressman Democrat. The first Republican governor in a long period of time was Ed Schaefer, elected in 1992, I think it was. And guess who the state Republican chairman was who engineered his election? Young man named Kevin Kramer, who then got elected to the Public Service Commission himself and helped lay the foundation for the energy boom in western North Dakota when he was on the Public Service Commission. So he had enormous support. Tonight, you're going to see not only western North Dakota be red, but you're going to see a deep red because there are a lot of people out there who know that their jobs exist because he took on the issue of providing the infrastructure for water and pipe and permits and the ability to develop the Bakken into what it is today. This state is now the second largest energy producer in America. And once President Trump authorized the pipelines so that crude could move by pipeline rather than truck or trade, the state of North Dakota is now collecting $500,000 more a day in revenue because it gets to get a slice of the profits of moving it by pipeline rather than by truck or train. That's why this state is so popular. President Trump is so popular in the state.
Molly, if you had to predict, if it lines up like this, the House going Democrat, looks like the Senate pickups for Republicans, how does President Trump talk about this night?
Well, I think he will speak the way he usually speaks about things, which is giving credit to himself. But in this case, I actually think it's very much important for him to do that. When you look at those special elections and off-year elections that we saw in the past couple of years, they were mostly devastating for Republicans. And President Trump had very low approval, high disapproval. I think people thought that coming into midterms, it was going to be a bloodbath, that President Trump would have to hide behind his desk, never being out on the campaign trail. It turns out that he has been the #1 asset for keeping the Senate, and that is huge. He's a huge draw. He motivates Republican voters, and it's also just the agenda that he has put forward. The economy being so good, the deregulation that has done so much to jumpstart the economy. These are reasons why Republicans are not facing what I think most people thought they were going to face, which was utter annihilation tonight.
Jessica, when you look at Heidi Heitkamp, Chris Van Hollen said recently, that the last race she won, she was down by 10 points, and she's a great closer, and she's able to do that. So is this potentially an example? We were talking about Democrats picking some very good candidates in the House. Carl's description of Kevin Kramer and the economic boom that he's helped to bring to North Dakota, is this a situation where it was a good candidate?
It looks like it. Excuse me. We'll wait to see how this pans out. I don't think Heidi Heitkamp is going to close this gap. And I do agree with the analysis that when she voted against Brett Kavanaugh, she saw the writing on the wall. I also think that that's just how she felt. And her mother is a survivor of sexual assault, and she felt very strongly about these issues. But I'm really interested to see, a la the Trump effect, what goes on with Josh Hawley, someone that he campaigned for a couple times. Obviously, Braun is exciting for him. And I've got to wrap it up.
No, because Mike Braun is speaking right now.
Great.
We just want to interrupt you. The winner in Indiana, let's take a listen.
Friends with Hoosiers, the way a campaign like this should be. And I want to thank all Hoosiers for giving me a resounding victory, putting your faith in me, and I will not let you down. I promise that. Senator Donnelly called me about 15 minutes ago. Yeah. And just like any competition, you fight hard, you want to win, you got to make your case. And we did it. The one thing I would love to see change in politics is it's gotten way too nasty on both sides. Yeah. It should be about ideas. It should be about what you bring to the table. And both sides and their families have had to carry that burden and the weight. Hope that changes down the road. Yes, sir. And then you look at other things. When I decided to do this, I wouldn't have done it, and I mention it almost everywhere I go, if it had been President Hillary Clinton. I'd be hunkered down in southern Indiana trying to survive. And, and I make that point because we as conservatives, being led by President Trump, we've got to prove why our way of thinking, why what works in the state of Indiana is going to work for the rest of America. And I really believe I can weigh in on that argument. Because when we moved back to our hometown, we did raise that family. 3 of my 4 kids work in my business. And the theme of my campaign is that we need to take to Washington what works in the real world, what works in Jasper, Indiana, what works in Warsaw, Indiana, what works in this great state where we lead by our performance, just like we did in tackling infrastructure. We're a state that works, and I thank my lucky stars that I was born in this state and in my hometown, and that it's worked out. I really do. And we have a narrow window. We've got 2 years to show that as conservatives, we can make things work. We need to get our president reelected. Yeah. And what we're going to do is we're going to get more people from the real world that have had to do things that can fix things in a dysfunctional system. You're going to find that other people across this country are going to stick their neck out and take a risk and try to fix things in Washington so the system works for everyone. That's my goal. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine when we made the decision to move back after serving on a school.
All right, so it is 10 p.m. here on the East Coast. Polls have closed in another 4 states, including Nevada, Montana, both of which will figure prominently, obviously, into determining which party will control the Senate. But we do have a race call.
Yes, we do, and it's in the state of Utah. It's not a surprise, but the Fox News decision desk can now project that former Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney will defeat Democratic opponent Jenny Wilson to succeed retiring GOP Senator Orrin Hatch. And it should be interesting to see Senator Romney in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's something we should get some thoughts on because Jeff Flake is gone. John McCain, obviously, has passed. Bob Corker is no longer in office. But perhaps Mitt Romney might be a little bit of a thorn occasionally in the president's side. We'll see.
I wouldn't overstate it, though, because Mitt Romney, who made that savage speech opposing Donald Trump in 2016, I think it was, called him a con man, all kinds of things. They seem to have come together. Remember, Romney auditioned and was seriously considered for Secretary of State. President Trump went out and endorsed Mitt Romney, and Romney was happy to get his endorsement. I agree with you. It's going to be fascinating to see. Yes, he's one of 100 senators, but he was as a former presidential nominee. He's a major voice in the party. I don't see him going there and becoming Jeff Flake and really going after Donald Trump. But I suspect there'll be some issues where there will be differences, maybe more on tone than there will be on substance.
As an executive, ran for president. It'd be interesting to see also how he deals with being 1 out of 100 in the U.S. Senate. We're waiting for more data from Montana before projecting who will win the battle between incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Tester and Republican challenger Matt Rosendale, the state auditor. President Trump, of course, has made it his mission to try to defeat Tester, who helped torpedo the president's nomination of White House physician Ronnie Jackson to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs. At this moment, we have Tester with a lead in this race, but obviously we're just closing there.
Take a look at Nevada, where we have Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Rosen. She's got a slight lead over the incumbent Republican Senator Dean Heller. Too early to declare a winner in that race. Obviously, it was a Hillary Clinton win state in Nevada, so he is a Republican, the only one Republican defending a state where Hillary won. Also, too early to project a winner in Nevada's gubernatorial election, which pits Republican Attorney General Adam Laxalt against Democrat Steve Sisolak, chairman of the Clark County Commission, in a battle to succeed term-limited GOP Governor Brian Sandoval.
We're also watching the gubernatorial election in Iowa. Incumbent Republican Governor Kim Reynolds being challenged by Democratic lawyer Fred Hubble. Too early to call that race as well.
Major race call to make, though, in North Dakota. As we take a look, the Fox News decision desk can now project that Republican Congressman Kevin Cramer will unseat one-term Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp, scoring a crucial Senate pickup for the GOP. Heitkamp, who had long struggled against Cramer in this reliably red state, sealed her political fate last month when she voted against Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. That may have been one of the major factors for her. Obviously, there's a lot of economic factors at play in North Dakota as well. Kevin Cramer's got a long history there, as Carl was just talking about.
Just think about this. Now, this is two incumbent Democrats taken down, Joe Donnelly and Heidi Heitkamp. Not a surprise in North Dakota, Britt. Surprise for some in Indiana. But now you are ticking up to the Senate, and Democrats need to pick up more because Republicans have added to their total.
Interesting that we're seeing in the Senate, which is where the action was, reaction to Kavanaugh playing such a big role in those races in particular. I think it also played a role in Joe Manchin's case, because I was told at the time during that whole hearing that he was looking at polling that showed that if he voted no on Kavanaugh, he was done, which he ultimately did not do. There's been a lot of discussion. You remember there was considerable discussion about whether he waited until Susan Collins had made her now famous speech before coming out, which he did. But the White House said that he'd called that morning and said he was going to be with him. So he would have been there all along, and it turned out to be the right calculation for his reelection purposes, not so much for the other two.
You look at the balance of power in the Senate. Democrats now need a net gain of 4 seats because of the Republican pickups. And you start looking at the map over with our other panel, Laura Ingraham. It gets a little tougher to see a Democratic effort to take over control of the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, again, the Kavanaugh effect is something we spent so much time talking about in October. We wondered how it would all play out. But when you're looking at these races, Manchin, he spent millions and millions of dollars to protect that seat, ultimately voted for Kavanaugh. Obviously, in Indiana, same deal. Donnelly voted no. He lost. Missouri, we'll see where that ends up. Josh Hawley's taken a lead in the current vote count. In Missouri, we'll see later whether McCaskill can hold on to that seat. She voted against Kavanaugh. In North Dakota as well, Heidi Heitkamp votes against Kavanaugh. I think in the end, people are pretty fair, and where maybe the White House oversteps, that people want to hold the president in check. But where they see rank unfairness, and I would add to that the constant demonization of the president as racist, as Hitler, as anti-Semitic, as every ism and ist you can think of. If Florida turns out to be held by the Republicans in the end, I'll think, and Georgia goes Republican, Oprah, Obama, the entire mainstream media have a huge amount of egg on their face. They invested huge in turning those states blue. And if those states don't flip blue, I think they have a lot to answer for, not Donald Trump.
One place did flip blue, and that is we're making the call for the Democrats to control the U.S. House of Representatives. Why are we making that call? Why, with all of those white seats still out there and our net gain in the House not at 23, why are we making that call? Here to explain is Chris Stirewalt, out of the jail of the decision desk room.
I feel like I've been summoned to the principal's office.
Why are we making that call?
Well, we're just that good. I don't mean to brag, but our Fox News voter analysis and what we're now starting to see as the House races count later and as they come in, because remember, with these House races, you don't have the kind of forecast you do on the Senate level. So it takes longer for them to start to catch up, but you're starting to see them catch up. And we said all along, look at that 6th district in Kentucky. That was a good one to watch. And the very fact that that race was as close as it was told us, and told me at least, that the Democrats are getting the kind of numbers they need. They had no business doing so well in a district like that. And now we're starting to see 2nd District of Kansas, again, a place that Republicans should be in, have no trouble. They're struggling. And as we look around the bend, as we go around the country, you will see more and more Democratic seats rack up. And at some point this evening, we're going to be able to tell you by how many seats the Democrats will take their majority. And that will have a lot to do with what they do once they get there.
Just throw it out there.
It's +7 right now. So where's it going to go?
I'm not telling. I'm not saying it, but I'm telling you we will know. We will be able to tell you tonight before every race is called
Not before
what
Brit
kind of margin
Hume
we're
is
looking
betting.
at. What's that?
Not before Brit Hume and his betting machine.
I don't want to tangle with Brit Hume's betting machine. I don't know, and he's probably got horse races on there and everything. All I know is the Fox News voter analysis is humming like it's just a Testarossa Ferrari. I'm so happy the way it's turning out, and we're really proud of the team.
So, Chris, while we've got you, 2 pickups, obviously, for the Senate for Republicans, and Florida is also, at this point, looking good for them. A quick thought on what Florida looks like and what you're waiting for, and Missouri as well.
Well, we will be counting, as I said, we'll be counting in Florida for a long time. Claire McCaskill is a tough out. The fundamentals, the structure of the state has significant advantage for Hawley. We know that. We know this is a very Republican state, but she is a very tough out. I know a couple things I'm not going to tell you right now, and I would say we are watching that state as closely as anything else, because if Hawley wins there, right? If he wins there, then it closes the door on any kind of Democratic hope to take the Senate and sets the stage for what a lot of people thought we were going to end up with tonight, which is a split decision. Democrats take control of the House and Republicans see gains in the Senate.
That's what we call in the business a deep tease.
Yeah. He always tells us. He knows things that he won't tell us.
He just won't tell us. All right.
Bring him down here. Come down here.
We'll bring you out again.
I'm up here with my bit of honey, and you're not taking me out.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
You bet.
Back with the panel. Juan, your reaction to what Laura said earlier about what we're seeing on the map.
Well, so Laura projects that somehow this is like egg on the face is what I think you said, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't see it that way. To the contrary, what I see is that you have a lot of red states, and I'm going to pick up on what Chris Starwalt was saying. You have a lot of red states where you would have thought Republicans were secure, that this was not going to be a big fight. And then you get, as you described, let's say Gillum in Florida, as being too far left for the state. But in fact, this is a very close race. And I think this is an indication of how people feel, what we said at the start of the night, about Donald Trump. And so you have people who, in a tribal, polarized electorate, are going to come out and they're going to say, hey, I'm a Republican, I'm a Trump Republican at this point because he owns the party. So I'm going to be a Trump Republican. But it does not suggest to me somehow that Democrats have egg on their face, and especially when you look at the House results, Lori.
So when Democrats lose, they win.
Not at all, but look, let's look at Virginia.
That's a good deal.
No,
that's a pretty good deal.
That's not what I'm saying.
That.
Look at Brett in Virginia,
yeah, it
right?
was a redistricted district. They spent $15
wait a second. Oh, wait a second. That's a Republican. That's a Republican district. Not now. Well, that's my point. You're making my point.
Redistricted, and immigration had a huge
and then
effect
you
on
keep
that
going
state.
around the country, and you keep seeing where it should be red states, red congressional districts, where Democrats are doing well tonight.
Juan, we've had about 2 months of people saying that Donald Trump was a combination of Stalin, Hitler, every tyrant that ever lived.
Well,
and they plastered the airwaves, New York Times, Washington Post, and he's going to pick up some, frankly, lame candidates and middling candidates on his back to victory that everyone was predicting
and what does that say?
He was going to lose.
It doesn't say much about people. It does not say much about anything but that we are tribal, divided, and there are people who would vote for anything with the Trump
Imagine
insignia
if the
on
media were about 50% fair. What would the numbers be?
Oh, come on. If the media was fair, they'd call Trump more out on his lies. You asked about racism. You asked about what's going on in the country in terms of the kind of language used. Imagine if people actually paid attention as opposed to just
Americans
saying,
are
I'm on the red team or the blue team.
Is that back to
so let's get back to the election. We'll get back to the election. That was an interesting discussion. We have a call to make, and that is in Kansas for Kansas governor.
Chris Kobach has lost that race. He's at 40%. Laura Kelly has picked it up 51%. This is a Democrat governor race for Kansas. Obviously, Chris Kobach ran into a difficult situation there. Carl, you want to weigh in on this? He was,
That's a red state.
Absolutely.
Well, look, but it's a red state that is of, it's not the deep, hard right red of other states. This is a state where there are moderate Republicans and moderate conservatives, Governor Brownback, who's now an ambassador, had split the Republican Party. Kobach represented the more conservative faction of the party. This is a state that has a reputation of electing Democrat governors than
Kathleen
Republican
Sebelius,
governors.
former HHS.
Right, and Kobach was just a little too hard to the right for the Republican electorate. He barely beat the sitting temporary governor, former Lieutenant Governor to Brownback, who'd succeeded when Brownback was named an ambassador. Chris got into the race against him, beat him narrowly. The party was deeply divided, and every former living Republican governor, plus former Senator Nancy Landon Kassebaum, all endorsed the Democrat Laura Kelly for.
But the other
governor.
issue there was also the issue of education and education funding in the state, and immigration was Chris Kobach's big thing. Laura Kelly focused on education, and it looks like it paid off.
Joining us now from Indianapolis is the Senator-elect, Mike Braun. Thank you very much for coming on, and congratulations on your win. How'd you do it?
Well, I tell you what, it was a 15-month journey, 6 days a week, 14 to 18 hours a day. And, you know, my message was we need to send people to D.C. that have lived it in the real world. You know, I built my business in my hometown, and, you know, I think if we get more people there, I think we'll see the dynamic change there. That's why I ran. That's why Hoosiers elected me, and I'm looking forward to serving.
Mr. Braun, I heard you in your speech when you were accepting. You talked about bringing back some civility to Washington. You said that it's all gotten too nasty. How do you plan to do that?
Indiana, thank you. Well, that'll be a lead by example. You know, I've always built my business by building bridges, getting along with folks, and I think that if there ever was a time when we need to find a way to reach across the aisle and have ideas, we all believe that health care needs to cost less. We just need to figure out a way to do it. We all need to. We all believe that we've got to put some type of security on our southern border. We all know that we need to start balancing our budgets. It's just going to take, I think, guys and ladies like me that have done things in the real world, or else we're not going to solve those problems.
You know, how much the president finished up his campaigning with you and went to Indiana quite a bit. How much do you put this on the president pushing you and this campaign in Indiana?
I think what the president has done is he's saying that we're not accepting business as usual in Washington. And I'm going there because I believe in that. You know, we won't agree on everything. I've always been one that has been an independent thinker. You get people to respect your ideas, and I think I'll be able to do that.
What are some of the areas that you would push back on?
Well, I like the idea that, you know, we're trying to fix a lot of problems that have been around for a long time, you know, and whether it takes a tariff or whether it doesn't, I want to see things get done. I want to see the fact that we, just like all businesses, like local governments, state governments, we've got to start balancing our budget. That'll be the biggest thing that hurts our country in the long run if we cannot have fiscal integrity. And I think it's more about discipline and more of the dynamic you get from where I've come from. The people that have been there, you know, obviously don't have those skills to get it done. And I'm hoping with the president's leadership, with more recruits like myself, we just simply start tackling these problems.
Senator-elect Mike Braun from the great state of Indiana, thank you very much for coming on, and congrats again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, we are following the Senate very closely. Republicans have now picked up 2 seats. Democrats, that means, have to go a long way to get control of the U.S. Senate. They need 4, a net gain of 4. We're watching a lot of tight races, and it's getting down to the wire on some of them.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this. So we have quite a bit of big news to report. We can call now that the Texas race will go to Ted Cruz, the incumbent Republican. That also gives us the ability to call the Senate for Republicans. They will retain the Senate with a number of big wins so far tonight and some still out there.
So Fox News can project that Republicans will retain control in the U.S. Senate. We do not know yet by how many. Right now, it's +2 for the Republicans, but that Ted Cruz win over Beto O'Rourke, significant. It was tight at the end, but now Cruz will be heading back to Washington and Republicans will remain in the majority. There are still some races out there where they could pick up even more, including Florida, which has Rick Scott up slightly down there against Democratic incumbent Bill Nelson. Let's just get reaction to the Senate staying in Republican hands.
Well, it's a big deal, and if the president had to win one house and lose the other, I think he clearly would have preferred what he's got, which is winning the Senate, because it does allow him all the nominations to the courts, perhaps another nomination or two to the Supreme Court. He's able to get new members of his cabinet appointed if he decides, and we hear that there's going to be a significant shuffle. If I may just put the tap on the brakes a little bit, I think we are overstating the importance, not the importance, but giving too much credit to Donald Trump for holding on to the Senate. The fact is, this was a historically difficult year for the Democrats. The Democrats had 26 seats that they had to defend. The Republicans had 9 seats they had to defend. And Donald Trump won in 10 of the states the Democrats were trying to defend. What we're talking about tonight is, and I'm not in any way diminishing Donald Trump's efforts or the fact that he's held on to the Senate and the importance of it, but we're talking about the fact that the Republicans have taken seats in North Dakota, Indiana, and Texas, which are very red states. So, yes, it's a victory for Donald Trump, but I think it's a tremendous overstatement to say that that Donald Trump pulled a hat out of the bag. This is something he should have been expected to do. He did it. Congratulations to him. But let's temper our excitement over Donald Trump's performance tonight.
Sure. He went to 11 cities in 8 states, made the closing campaign, fired up only places that he won on the 2016 election. But, Britt, $5.2 billion spent in this election, more than that.
Like
and Democrats.
We've seen, and staggering turnout. I mean, one estimate earlier said that the turnout with the vote not even anywhere near complete in Texas had surpassed 2014's total.
Let alone all the coverage. I mean, there has never been a candidate,
I never saw so much intense coverage of a midterm, ever. This was record-breaking in that department. Look, I think Chris has got a point. But remember, it wasn't so long ago that the predictions were almost universal that we're going to have a blue wave, and that the Republicans, despite the map, it's so much in their favor, might even lose the Senate. And the fact that they've had these pickups is a sign, at least, that his campaigning didn't hurt these candidates, which is important because he was the central issue in some ways.
I just want to tap the brakes once more. In terms of the House,
we're not driving. We're just cruising.
We don't know what the margin is going to be. Right. We don't know where Republican seats are going to flip to Democratic seats. And we don't know, for instance, what's going to happen in the Rust Belt. I think there's the possibility here, and let's wait and see what happens, that parts of the country that voted and put Donald Trump over the top, that you're going to see in those same states that people are now changing their mind and voting for the Democrat over the Republican.
If you look at the state of Florida.
Well, I'm talking more about the Midwest.
I understand, but if you look at the state of Florida, to Laura's point, and Ron DeSantis, if he pulls this out, if Rick Scott pulls this out, that is not going to be outside of Donald Trump. He obviously had a big role in Florida.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying let's stop with all the hosannas to how Donald Trump pulled this out, because, frankly, the Republicans should have won, given the map of these states.
And they certainly should win Texas in any scenario that you can kind of.
There hasn't been a Democrat who's won Texas since 1994.
That's right. So the question, one interesting question is, Ted Cruz has been a controversial figure as a senator, and you remember he was the one that led the revolt against the leadership in the Senate over the health care bill when the Republicans were still in the minority and so on in the Senate. And now, what lesson will he take away from this? He wanted desperately to be president. He ran 2 years ago as an outsider and was beaten by a real outsider. What role does he play now? Does he become a team player in the Senate? He has to some extent over the last couple of years. What role does he play now? What's the future for him? Does he feel rebuked tonight by a much closer call than he should have had against a Democrat in that state?
And with regard to Donald Trump, it's worth remembering that Ted Cruz never supported Donald Trump all the way up to the convention. He stood on the convention floor, gave a very long speech, and refused to endorse him as the candidate as President Trump walked into the room and took his seat in the middle of Ted Cruz's speech. He says, we've come a long way from that. I'm very supportive of him now. But you have to ask yourself, you know, given the charisma and the money behind Beto O'Rourke, if Ted Cruz had not taken the support and embraced it from President Trump, whether or not he would have been able to pull this win out tonight. Why don't we ask Karl Rove?
Well, I think the bigger question is Beto O'Rourke. If
you mean Robert
now you're going to call him Beto?
You're going to call him Beto because he lost?
Yeah, because he's lost, I'm going to call him Beto. If he had understood that he was running in a red state, he might have had a better shot because there was a lot of dissatisfaction with Ted Cruz. Think about it. The gap right now between Governor Abbott and Senator Cruz is 10 points. The Cruz is at the top of the ticket, Abbott right below him. In June, O'Rourke endorsed impeachment. He came out for Medicare for all with the abolition of, and defended it, abolition of private insurance, called for the abolition of the ICE, said he was in favor of a universal, he thought it was a very interesting idea to have a universal jobs guarantee. So all of these sort of nostrums. And then in September said he couldn't think of anything more American than deciding to take a knee. If there's one thing Texans are, they're patriotic people. And so over the course of the campaign, he systematically alienated any shot he had at getting any moderate independent vote or any Republican votes who didn't like Ted Cruz, unless they just really didn't like Ted Cruz at all. And this was a race he could have won had he run a different campaign with $70 million in his pocket.
I mean, not to go back to the who gets credit. This is one thing I think we do know. If the Republicans were not able to take these seats that they took tonight, there would be a cavalcade of criticism on Donald Trump. Trump lost these seats. Yeah. Trump should have taken these seats. It was Trump's fault. Look, he went to all these cities and he couldn't turn out the vote. I believe if Donald Trump hadn't done that massive rally in Texas last week and hadn't been there, and Don Trump Jr., which I think nobody's talked about tonight, Donnie Trump Jr. went all over the country. And I think he had a big impact on this race as well. If the president hadn't done those rallies in some of these key areas, I don't know if Ted Cruz would have won. And the party is coming home to Trump. I mean, the party is unified. That doesn't mean they agree with everything he tweets or they like every position on immigration. I'm not saying that. But I think most in the party realize that if you're not aligned behind the basic principles of kind of this conservative populist approach of Trump, not his tone necessarily, but his policies, you're not going anywhere. And by contrast, the Democrats are going home to more of a Ocasio-Cortez party, which I think in 2020, to Carl's point, that's going to be a tough sell. I don't think that works.
I don't think that's a fair thing to say about the Democrats. I think that is a complete mischaracterization.
Okay, go ahead.
Laura, if you look at the Democrats who are winning across, Abigail Spanberger, Jennifer Wexton, look at them. I think the reason that they're winning is not because they went far left, it's because they got women who have military or intelligence credentials, and there's this caricature out there. Let's wait and see what the Democratic margin is. Let's see where they won, and let's see what their policies are. And, you know, if you're going to give the Republicans credit for holding on to the Senate, then I think you have to give the Democrats credit for actually flipping the House.
Well, all right, Dana, weigh in here.
Well, I think I'm interested in the urban versus rural split, and I think you've seen this in all of these races. It was evident in 2016. I think it's deepened in 2018. And just talking about the Senate and the House and how these parties think about what 2018 meant to them, what messages they ran on, what they believe in, and how do they go forward in 2020. Because can Republicans figure out a way to make inroads into the cities? Is it possible for them to do that? I think so, but they're going to have to try. And vice versa with the Democrats. They have not talked about immigration. They tried to avoid it. They were very disciplined in their message in talking about health care. And maybe that pays off for them right in the House. But then the question, I guess, for the left and the right is, okay, then now what do you do about it legislatively? If you are going to have split government, going into 2020, which, as we all know, that's a big deal. Can they come to find some sort of agreement that the American people can support, or will it just be more fighting? And these are the very same issues that we'll be talking about 2 years from now.
We are having split government, according to the Fox News desk.
Yes, let me amend my verb.
Yes. Otherwise, Starrod will be back out here telling us. We have a couple race calls to make. First, in Colorado, Democratic Congressman Jared Polis becomes the first openly gay man to win a gubernatorial election in the U.S. history by defeating GOP Treasurer Walker Stapleton to succeed term-limited Democratic Governor John Hickenlooper, who's also talked about possibly running for president. In New Hampshire, Republican Governor Chris Sununu will win a second term by defeating Democrat Molly Kelly. New Hampshire, obviously very important when it comes to 2020. Now Republicans in control in Vermont, in New Hampshire, in Massachusetts. It's really interesting to look.
Florida.
And possibly Florida. And you look at the Northeast, who they choose lawmakers who are pretty liberal and governors who are pretty conservative, at least so far.
The interesting thing, and I agree with Laura on this, I think that in Congress, particularly with some of these swing suburban districts going to the Democrats, that you're going to see a lot of the moderate Republicans flush out, and this is going to become more than ever the party of Trump in Congress. On the other hand, there are, as we talked about in some of these states, Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, Larry Hogan in Maryland, some of these people you're talking about in other states, moderate Republicans, not saying anti-Trump, but more moderate Republicans, but they're going to be in state houses. They're not going to be in Congress. This is really going to be the party of Trump in Congress.
Guy?
So I'm struck by this. 2 years ago, we were all sitting in this room, and right around now, 10:30 Eastern, eyes started to get really wide because the conventional wisdom was being uprooted, and what everyone expected to happen suddenly was not. Here in 2018, what did we expect coming into tonight? A favorable map for Republicans in the Senate, Democrats with a good chance to flip the House because of suburban districts, and Democrats doing well among governors in the middle of the country. And what are we seeing? Precisely what the conventional wisdom anticipated for tonight. I know there's a long way to go, but the difference is striking between the utter shock of 2016 and, frankly, the lack of shock, a few races here or there, this year.
But you're not bored.
Not bored at all. There's some big races I want to see.
Yeah, speaking of a lack of shock, Mitt Romney is the new senator just elected in Utah, and he is speaking. Let's listen in for a minute.
With Mike Lee.
I want to issue a hearty congratulations to my friend Mitt Romney. He's going to be an outstanding United States Senator. Don't you agree? And with the Republican majority that I sense we're going to hold on to in the Senate tonight, we're going to do great things. Thank you to Utah for electing this good man. I look forward to working with him.
Where's the governor? And the first lady? Come on up here. Yeah, I love Ann too, I got to tell you.
Jeanette and I would love to offer our congratulations to you. Good work you're going to do, have done, and we appreciate all the people that have been on the team helping you get elected. And what I like about this is you're going to take back to Washington, D.C., Utah values, Utah principles, and help us get this country going in the right direction. So congratulations. We're honored to have you in Mike Lee's service, Junior Senator Mitt Romney.
Where's dinner? Well, we've had dessert, though, haven't we? Wow. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you from Mitt Romney. Successful in this round of election. He ran for president, of course, unsuccessfully, but is now a new senator-elect from the state of Utah. Let's bring in someone else who will be a senator alongside him, South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, watching all this. Senator, great to have you with us tonight. What do you make so far of the pickups that you see in the Senate? What's your outlook for the rest of the night? Let us know.
Well, number one, the victory party in Utah is without alcohol and caffeine, so they're just naturally happy there. So the bottom line is that the conservative judicial train will keep running. We had a good night in the Senate. We're going to pick up 3 or 4 seats at least. President Trump has a lot to be proud of in terms of creating the enthusiasm in these red state Trump states that Democrats held. Without him, I don't think we'd had the night we have. On the House side, it looks like we may lose by a few votes. We got to address the suburban women problem because it's real. But I'm excited. It means judges keep moving forward on the conservative side, and it's going to put some pressure on all of us to up our game.
Senator, it's Brett. What about the House? I mean, do you foresee that this is going to be investigation after investigation? And how do you sense the Senate and the House working together, if at all?
Well, if they want to impeach President Trump, I would give them some advice. I've been there, done that with Clinton. Didn't work out for us. I would think twice about it. It will blow up in their face. Now, infrastructure. There's a natural fit for both parties to build out the infrastructure of this country. DACA for the wall. There's actually something you can do on immigration, maybe prison and sentence reform, and maybe some other things. But the reason we won is I think Kavanaugh united our party. The caravan was a front to our sovereignty. The economy was good, and President Trump worked his butt off to get out the Republican base vote. And I'm feeling really good now. This is a good night for Republicans in the Senate. Cory Gardner did a great job. We're just going to have to find common ground with the Democrats in the House. If they want to investigate Trump to death and try to impeach him, then it'll blow up.
Senator, you said that Republicans have some lessons to learn when it comes to women in the suburbs in this country. Perhaps some of that goes to the issue of character that President Obama talked about. It goes to some of the issues of style for the president. You're close to him. What kind of advice would you have for him on that issue tonight?
I think he said something right before the vote came in that, you know, maybe tone does matter. President Trump's been a great commander-in-chief. The economy is humming. We're safer. We're more prosperous. But, you know, style does matter. Sometimes it can drown out substance. This is a good night by any measure on the Senate side. It's a great night for us. And I think the House, if they do take over the majority, the Democrats will be close. But you need to learn from every election. I think the president has already started the discussion about a better tone. There are things we can do with Democrats only if they'll work with us. If they want to stiff-arm the president, then they'll pay a price in 2020.
You know, you were a big part of that hearing, the Kavanaugh hearing, and obviously expressed your emotions during it. What percentage do you think that affected what you're seeing in the Senate races tonight?
30 days before the election, 3 things happened. The Kavanaugh hearing, which was despicable, a Democratic debacle. It united every Republican, no matter what stripe of Republican. This was a good man that had his life ruined, and Republicans were offended. We congratulated President Trump for nominating Kavanaugh, and we were disgusted with what the Democrats tried to do to destroy his life. I think it had a lot to do. I think Joe Donnelly, all of them in these Trump states, it was really a very bad vote for them to take. The caravan did not help either.
Senator, you know, when we watched all of that play out with Brett Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh now, some of the strongest voices were Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, the senators who came out the most strongly against him, and that they are both expected to be potential candidates. Is there a message for them tonight from what we're seeing?
Yeah, you pretty much locked down the Republican majority. As much as you tried to destroy Kavanaugh, you destroyed your colleagues. Claire McCaskill, I think she's probably going to lose. Joe Donnelly's a fine guy. But when he voted against Kavanaugh, that was it for me. I hope Tester loses. You know, Manchin won. He was smart enough to vote for Kavanaugh. I think red state Trump Democrats it was a nightmare for them, the way that Spartacus and these other people handled the hearing. So maybe they don't understand this, but I do. You've done a lot of damage to moderate Democrats, and one of the reasons we're winning big tonight in the Senate is because of the way you treated Brett Kavanaugh, and we'll learn from our problems with suburban women. I think President Trump is well on his way to getting reelected, and we'll see what we can do with the Democratic House.
All right, Senator Lindsey Graham from the great state of South Carolina. Senator, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Well, we've got a lot more coming. We're watching these races in Florida. It's really tight, and we're going to bring you an update about Florida. We're going to bring you an update about Missouri. Guess what? We're going to check in on Michigan. Where's Michigan been? Let's get some raw vote total there. Maybe we'll pull Steyerwald out of the room again. Who knows? Stay with us.
We'll be right back.
We have Rick Scott up by about 60,000 votes over incumbent Bill Nelson, and we're not seeing a lot of vote out there yet. Karl Rove, where is this?
Well, I've got a handful of precincts, 7 in Osceola, which is up south of Orlando. Tampa, St. Pete, Hillsborough County has 23 out, 19 precincts out in Miami-Dade out of 907. So, and we've got less than 22 precincts out in Broward County at 577, and 27 out of 871 in Palm Beach, and that's it.
So, I mean, you've got a scenario where you're running out of places for Nelson to pick up to 60,000. Let's go over to Missouri. The Senate race there, we're getting 47% of the votes projected in. And you see Josh Hawley with a pretty big lead. This is the rural side of Missouri. We're still waiting on a lot of the urban areas in that state to come in.
They were the first to come in with the early vote, and St. Louis County,
They didn't have
St.
an early
Louis
vote.
City.
Missouri votes just
they've
today.
Absentee. They have the absentee. So they had Kansas City and St. Louis came in first. Now we're starting to see rural Missouri.
Okay, and Florida governor.
Talk to us about that. Andrew Gillum and Ron DeSantis. Early in the evening, it looked like Gillum was way ahead. Now this is extremely tight.
87,000 votes, I think, was the
79,000.
And the interesting thing is that he's actually getting DeSantis is getting fewer votes than is Rick Scott, but he's got a wider margin because there is a third-party candidate that gave people a chance to say, I don't want to vote for DeSantis, but I cannot bring myself to vote for Gillum. Was taking, last time I looked, 44,000 votes.
Oh. What were you going to say, Lauren?
There's a couple of questions that are outstanding, and we don't really know the full answers to them yet. But when you think of the billionaires that put money into these races, and I was looking back at a piece in August about how all the money in politics was now on the left. Obviously, Tom Steyer, Bloomberg putting in a huge infusion of money late in these races, lots of commercial time bought. Was that money well spent, especially on these Senate seats? And we're seeing in the Georgia gubernatorial race some interesting numbers. 67% of the vote in, and there's a 10-point differential with Kemp up 54 to Abrams 44. Now, again, we'll see how that goes. We don't know where that's going to end up. But think of who came in for Stacey Abrams. Oprah did an amazing event. I mean, if you're a Democrat, Oprah is cool, and she's a great speaker. Obama came in. I believe Michelle had a presence there. This was star power central in Georgia. If this ends up staying with Kemp after the voter suppression claims and the concern about his hacking investigation, then that's another interesting development in a state that's the Democrats are really hoping to flip to permanent blue.
All right,
Can I add? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that we just talked about Laura Kelly winning in Kansas. She's the Democrat there beating Chris Kobach. She's a very pragmatic Democrat. And then if you look at Florida and Georgia, they nominated Democratic candidates that are very progressive in red states. And so figuring out who the best candidate is to win in these states that are traditionally Republican or Democrat makes a big difference.
But
I do want to go ahead.
I think a lot of this has to do, again, with red state, blue state, polarized electorate. So Trump goes into red areas and he's able to energize. Now, we talk about something like Georgia or Florida. you have two African Americans as the lead personalities. In fact, people thought Gillum was going to pull up Bill Nelson. That hasn't happened. And I think a lot of this that we're ignoring is, wait a second, we're talking about the Deep South. We're talking about Georgia and Florida, and we're talking about, oh, bring in Obama, bring in Oprah Winfrey, but you still have this kind of necessity to overcome a racial barrier here. And I think that's a large part of it. Now, when you look at New England and you start looking at people like Charlie Baker, or you come down the path all the way to Maryland, Larry Hogan, that's a different kind. Those people have not bought into red state Donald Trump politics. I don't know that they have a place. I don't know that moderate Republicans exist anymore. They're the ones being pushed out.
Governors, you just listed.
I said they don't have a place in Donald Trump. They've separated themselves from Donald Trump, and they don't have a future because after tonight, given the way that you've interpreted it, Lord, the way that I see it being interpreted, people will say, oh, Donald Trump is further empowered, especially in the Senate.
I want to look at an African-American who's running as a Republican in Michigan, and I think we have that before we head out to Arizona, and that is John James. This is the vote that we have in so far, 44%, with Debbie Stabenow, the incumbent, leading here. James is closing in the final days. We don't know where the rest of this vote is, but it's too close to call for us to make a call.
So let's go to Arizona now and take a look at that race, which is also undecided at this point. And Alicia Acuna is standing by. She is at Martha McSally's, what she hopes will be her party, her event later this evening. Alicia?
Hi, Martha. Yes, and I spoke with a member of Martha McSally's staff earlier tonight. She said that as they were watching the returns coming in terms of the Senate races across the country, they were starting to feel very good. Oftentimes when something is this tight heading into Election Day, you hear a lot of optimism, guarded optimism. They said they're feeling good. From what we understand, Congresswoman McSally is with her family at this time. She'll be heading here at some point throughout the evening. The whole place is really filled up. We're expecting to see incumbent governor, re-elect Doug Ducey here as well. You're going to have the whole GOP contingent. This has remained so close this entire time, and we only have 7% of the precincts reporting at this time, and so it's really neck and neck. But if you look at the county breakdown, it's really interesting because I'm looking at some of these border states, and Pima County, that's the home of Tucson. Kirsten Sinema is leading there. But then if you go over just to the west, you look at Yuma County, Martha McSally is leading there. All of the returns that we've seen coming in right now, remember, those are all from the early balloting, the early elections that happened, early voting that happened. They already had those ready to go this evening when the polls closed so that they were able to begin reporting. So we're going to start seeing all of the day of balloting that came in today. Why that's so important, because 80% of the votes were already cast before this day even started, is because you have some very conservative-leaning areas, older Republicans who vote day of. We're still waiting for those to come in. That's Maricopa County. In Maricopa County, the largest voting district in the state and one of the largest voting districts in the country has yet to really have its final say. Martha?
Alicia, thank you very much. We're going to watch that one as it continues to come in tonight. A lot of tight races out there.
And one of them, again, we've been talking about in Florida. Peter Ducey is down in Naples, Florida, looking at this race between Governor Rick Scott and Bill Nelson. Peter.
And Brett, I've heard from officials with the Scott campaign in their war room and also some officials with the DeSantis campaign in their war room up in Orlando, and they want to know why this race hasn't been called yet because, and you can hear behind me, the crowd is very engaged every time that they see any kind of a statistic on the screen that shows that the race is either close or tied or with them a sliver ahead. They get very, very excited. But the campaigns here, Governor Scott for Senate and Congressman DeSantis for Florida governor, they're looking at the map and they think that they've got enough to win. And they're very confident. You don't normally hear that from a campaign before anybody has made a call, but the way that one party official described it to me, a Republican Party official, they think that it is possible that Democrats could make up the ground, but they think that it is improbable. So they're basically sitting back there just trying to figure out when they could potentially come out to speak to supporters when there's a call. Brett?
Peter Ducey in Naples, thank you. We've got a call to make in a governor's race that's important, and that is in Ohio. Fox News can now project that Mike DeWine will win in Ohio. The Republican holding off a challenge from the Democrat, Richard Cordray. Cordray, of course, was the head of the Consumer Protection Division under President Obama. Now, DeWine, who has served as Ohio's Attorney General since 2010, he was a U.S. Senator before losing to Sherrod Brown. But a big win in Ohio governor's race. This is to fill John Kasich's seat, and it also means a lot in 2020. Think about this. If a Republican controls Ohio and a Republican controls potentially Florida, that means a lot for a prospective candidate and President Donald Trump for re-election.
I mean, if it turns out that way, those would be two extremely big wins for the president tonight as he looks forward to 2020. All of the issues of redistricting that could take place if a Democrat had won in Ohio would have had large ramifications. And as Peter says, we're still waiting for Florida, but it is looking like it's leaning in the Republican direction tonight. So, you know, in the end, you know, I mean, obviously we're far from the end at this point, but when President Trump sort of adds up things tonight, those are going to be two really important issues for him, perhaps even more important for the House for his own presidential race.
Let's update a couple of other governor's races. Look at the numbers here. We haven't made a call in Georgia. Stacey Abrams trailing, as Laura mentioned, Brian Kemp, the Secretary of State there, 70% of the vote in. And we are going to be looking at this very closely. And there you see it ticking down as well. Iowa governor. Iowa governor right now early, 15% in. The Democrat Fred Hubbell over the incumbent Kim Reynolds. And obviously Iowa will play a significant role in the presidential election as well.
One interesting thing about Georgia is there'd been a lot of thought, because it was a third-party candidate, that neither of them would get to 50%, and therefore there would be a runoff on December 10th. But as you can see here in these numbers, Brian Kemp is at 53%. So were he to hold on to that majority, he would be the governor and there'd be no runoff.
Paul Rove, we only have 30 seconds.
Yeah, be careful. Fulton and DeKalb counties, metropolitan Atlanta and the city of Atlanta are not in. Only the initial early vote in DeKalb, and 140 of 373 precincts in Fulton. So there's a lot of vote out there yet to come in.
So
this race is going to tighten.
Please forget everything I just said.
Okay, we will. We are counting
already
down.
had.
This is the punchy part of the program where it starts getting punchy. We're counting down to the final big chunk of poll closings this evening. They're coming up after a short break here on America's Election Headquarters.